Okay, in this video, I want to go over a quick tip on how to shape your eyeballs before you get to the part of actually cutting your irises in and making commitments. Because one of the issues that we're going to run into with our characters is that um, a key component of our character design and the appeal of our character is the size of the iris in relationship to the edges of the eyes, or essentially your eye line. Um, and so by taking a precaution in this step to make sure we're getting the right scale and size before we model the iris, which will be covered in the next video. This will help us with not having to backtrack or not getting weirdly scaled stuff, right? Because if you start scaling things, like you place it and you're like, oh, I don't like the size of that, and you go and try to scale things and you have to worry about it penetrating through the model. You have to worry about maybe making things no longer round and spherical, and that could be a problem. So the first step I'm going to do is what I did was I just had this model. I have these spheres right here that I just placed in. But if I brought in like a ZBrush sculpt or something like that, or from another program, and these were like, for instance, um, like not actual spheres that have ring topology, but they instead had quad square grid topology. Like if you had like a polysphere. So if you did something like this isn't quite spherical, but you had something like this. This isn't super helpful. You could always do that, but personally, I preferred working with a standard sphere topology geometry, like a polygon sphere, because then you have this ring topology, and that makes it really easy for you to cut in irises and get this shape. So all I really did was I went ahead and created a sphere. I just kept its default settings for now. I just snapped it. I'm holding V to snap to vertice or polygon, and then just hold J and rotate it so that we can get the pull to point forward. That pull is going to act kind of like our iris and pupil. And then what I can do is I just put it in, and I usually will just go ahead and turn on, for instance, X-ray, and maybe even just hide, just isolate these. So I'm pressing Control 1 and just scaling this and positioning it so that it sits inside of it. Another thing I could do is an easy way of doing this is that let's go ahead and turn that off. I'm going to press D, hold V to move the pivot point to the front part. And then I can then turn off editing the pivot point by pressing D again, or switching the move tool off, and then switching back. And then if I hold V and drag on the front of my iris pupil area, right, then what I can do is I can just scale it up until it more or less fits, right? And what I really care about is I want it to fit in the eye socket. This is, dependent on your team and how you guys have done this process, but let's go ahead and I'll just hide the original one for now. So I just want it to fit in the eye socket nicely. I generally don't care how big the eyeball is inside there. I just don't want it to poke out of the head. That might be a character modeling issue, right? You might have to go back to the stage of sculpting and reconfiguring like the proportions, because I like on a stylized character like this, I like the eyeball to be nice and big. If it's too small, right? But it still fits inside the eye socket. It feels a little bug-eye and bulgy. Let's go ahead and make sure that kind of fits. Obviously, it's not fitting in the eyelids or eye socket, but if you do that, that can feel how flat this one over here is, whereas this one right here has a lot of curvature to it. So I tend to try to go for like a big flat eyeball in a non realistic character, a stylized character. And so, yeah, I'm just going to put it in like that. I've already done this, but that's pretty much all I'm going to try to do. And then once I've gotten it there, I'll just go modify center pivot, so that the pivot point's in the middle of the eyeball. And I want to keep it spherical. I don't want to distort its shape, make it more oval, because then I can rotate the eye as much as I can. And once as much as I need, it's not going to leave the eye socket, which makes rigging it a lot easier. I'm going to delete that and just go back to the one that I'd created earlier. So we're going to go over here, show that eyeball. Okay. And then all I did was I just took my object, put it in a group, duplicated it, and scaled it in the -X. So to get this one over here, all I did was just put this in a group, and then we're going to take this group, duplicate it, I'm going to scale it in the -X axis, like that. Assuming my character is centered across the middle of the scene, then that should, if I scale out group -1, it should flip it to the other side of the character. And then I'm going to right click and say freeze all. My normals are going to get flipped, so I'm just going to do select this and go mesh display reverse normals on this anything that turned black when I did that as far as my transforms, and then I'll just delete history on it just to keep things clean. Okay, so now we have the eyeball fit, so let's go ahead and talk about the iris. So in the later video, I talk about like actually modeling the iris, but I'm going to show you a step of how we're going to get a sense of it and shape it. First thing I did was to kind of simulate the catch light and reflection of the eyes. I just went ahead and assigned a new material. So I just did a Phong or blend material. On that material, I'm just going to go in here and go down. In this case, it's the cosine power. I'm just going to increase it. You can increase it past 100. So I'm going to increase it to that. Make the color brighter. So now you can see I have like this kind of like little fake catch light. Okay, so now to get a figure on how our iris size is going to work, we're going to do a little trick in here with these spheres, and it's just going to be doing a ramp. So I'm going to click on this little input on the color. Just click on that button right there. I'm going to go down here and find ramp. And then in order to make sure I'm seeing this, I'm going to turn on texture. So in this case, I loaded in my character's diffuse texture, probably a really good idea because without it, you know, if my character doesn't have their skin color, right, like I'm missing a lot of information about their eyebrows and their eyelashes and any face color patterning or painting, which can be really crucial for understanding like the relationship of the eyes to the face, right? Because as soon as you put on the rest of the color, the eyes might seem smaller or bigger or the wrong color. I'm not trying to figure out color right now. I'm just trying to figure out size, but you know, it can help. Let's go to that shader. I'm going to go back to that color, click on this little input where my ramp was plugged in. And so by turning on that texture, I'll be able to see this. So first we're going to go ahead and just swap these two color inputs. This is just a linear gradient. I'm not going to go over kind of like what a gradient is or anything like that. But what I'll generally do is I'll generally try to size up the iris first. And so one thing you're probably going to notice is that especially with a character who's you know, the eyelids kind of curve back out here and they're kind of flat here. When I put, in this case, when I put my character's eyes in, even though if I look at these and isolate them, you can see they're pointing straight, but it looks like her eyes are turned in. So that's totally normal. One of the things you'll probably end up doing. You can do it now in this stage and maybe keep the, let's go ahead and make sure I'm freezing my transforms though, because I do have some values on here. So we'll freeze all, just make sure I'm not getting any accidental rotation. And so, you know, I'll just kind of like rotate it out a little bit. So let's see, I'll take this value here. So it's -4. And then let's go over to the other one. And then we're just going to drop that same thing in, but we're going to do it positive. So they're just kind of, we could set up something a little bit more complicated if we wanted to, where, you know, I just did like an inverse expression relationship between them, right? But let's not overcomplicate this. Okay, another thing I might want to do is I might want to consider, do I want to raise the eyes? Because right now her lower eyelids are kind of fully open and her upper eyelids are half open, but it looks like her upper eyelids are fully open. So one thing you might want to do is you might want to consider like, can I move this upwards, maybe translate it back a little bit? And then does that feel like that sits in her eyelids? I might have to make an adjustment to her eyelids because you can see it's like kind of poking through. But you know, that kind of feels a little bit more natural. So I would maybe consider that. Another option you have is you can just rotate her eyes up a little bit. And it would probably be a good idea to like, if you're going to do any rotation on the eyes, I'm rotating the eyeball itself, but you might want to, in order to preserve the directionality, you might want to like actually be rotating the group. And so in order to do that, I would do like modify center pivot. And then I would just, you know, come in here and I would actually do the rotation and store the rotation values on the group. Because in that way, the actual object itself keeps its local orientation without being frozen. So if I come in here, let's do this really quickly. I'll do 0 and 0. And on the group itself, right, we're going to store the transform values or do the rotation. Oops, that's one I think is -3, right? on the group. So this is like a transform group. So you can call it like I underscore, this would be the left eye underscore X form. So let me know that's a transform. And then now I can freeze out my model and not have anything on the model. And then when I create joints and controls, I can just use this to grab the orientation of the eyeball and keep it. Because you'll see, even though let's go ahead and isolate this. Even though I've frozen my transformations, if I go to the side view, oops, you can see it's tilted up, and even though on the actual eyeball itself, it's zeroed out. So that's pretty nice. Okay, let's go back to my view here. All right. So let's go back, and now let's go ahead and, like, I would just, maybe consider moving the eyes, maybe even rotating them out, so that it feels like the character's kind of face staring a little bit forward, right? One thing to keep in mind is that for eyeballs or a character's eyes, what you want is, let's see, let's do J, let's rotate that like that. So I got this little quick eye rig, and so you can see I have these two eyes, and they're both kind of pointing in this direction. And this is like a common rig you'll probably see is something like this, where you'll have a master eye controller, which you're using to look in different directions with both eyes and focus on a certain target. And then you can use individual eyes to get like some finer control. And so a lot of times when you're rigging the character, it's probably a good idea to rig it with the eyes pointing forward if you can, so that it's really easy to line and get the joints and direction kind of figured out. And then a lot of times what I'll do is you'll be focusing the eyes, right? Because when you focus, your eyes are pointing towards a target, right? And so both eyes are kind of orienting and pointing towards a target. So especially if I move these on top of each other, so let's go ahead and do this. Like if there's something in the scene that you want the characters or assets to look at, right? From back here, it looks like they're focused on something in the foreground, right? The further out they go, you can see the eyes go further apart. The closer the object is, the more cross-eyed they look, right? As they're focusing. And so this is a common way to have them look like they're looking at something. So that's just something that you'll have to keep in mind if you do end up rotating your eyes and getting them into a specific position in the eyes. You'll probably want to figure out how to rig them so that they're, not too off in terms of rotation, and then get them kind of straightened and aligned if you can. And then through rigging and posing, you can get their gaze to be a little bit more comfortable. But you could also just work with what you have here and just work with offsets and be okay with it being offset from a joint being oriented to the world. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of show that setup. All right, so we're here. So let's take a look at this size of the iris. So we're going to come in here, go back to that ramp shader. We just got like our two colors, and we're just bringing them close together so we can get that sharp edge outline. I'd figure out the size of the iris, so I'm just coming back in here. Something you can do is, if you don't like this selection highlighting, but whenever you click off, you have to keep going back and forth, you can just go in here to show, turn off selection highlighting. And I think I could probably turn off the manipulator. There we go. So then I'm just only looking at the object I've selected without seeing all the viewport stuff. And so just bringing those two colors together. Then let's go ahead and add two more really close together. And then this one right here, I'm going to go ahead, and if I look at this larger, it looks like this. So I took this one right here, and I'm going to go ahead and choose I was just working with a grayscale value to keep things simple. And I'm looking at it from out here. So the character's eyes look a little starey, which is a good thing why we're doing this, right? Because it kind of looks like her eyes are pointing out in different directions, which is totally from the orientation of the eyes, right? If I take these and I isolate them, right, you can see it's the orientation of the eyes. And so what I might need to do is I might just need to go back in and let's just rotate them a little bit less. So we're just going to rotate them in like that. So that's 1.5. And so on this one right here, I'll just do negative 1.5. There we go. So that's a little bit better. I probably will go in here, and I'll also probably reduce the lightness on those iris. So just maybe bring that in a little bit. I'll probably go ahead and now play with the size of her pupils. So make her pupils bigger. Just it looks a little bit more appealing on this character specifically. Not always the case for your character. I'm probably going to come in here and also take this black value and make it a little bit lighter. So something like that. But I kind of like the gradients, so keeping that. And so that's kind of like how I would work with it, right? So if I, if it's, some things to keep in mind is, your irises could be too big, right? So you see how much white you have around the eyes. Depends on the style, of course, but in my case, this is like too big, right? And so you don't get a lot of good eye direction for the character and expressivity. You can have, let's go ahead and bring that back. So I think this is a pretty comfortable amount to have a good amount, just a decent amount of white under the eyes, not too much above the eyes. Just like a good proportion. It's kind of hard to explain. In this case, I wouldn't want to make her pupils too small because it makes it look like she's like, you know, she's like high on something, or she's really scared. We can always do blend shapes and rigging so we can change the size of her pupils. I probably wouldn't change the size of a character's irises unless you're going very stylized. And we also probably want to make sure that we're not making maybe the irises too small too, right? Like if I do something like this, even if her pupils are a little bit bigger, again, it's a style thing, but for me, I just don't like that style. It doesn't make her as cute in this situation. So yeah, so this is pretty much it. This is just so that we can kind of figure out the size of the irises, because what's cool is, let's go ahead and turn back on the selection highlighting and the manipulator. If I come in here, now what I can do is, if I didn't delete the history, and I probably did, but if I didn't delete the history, yeah, I did. I could just change the subdivision height, and I can actually get an edge loop that lines up exactly where I need it to. Alternatively, what I can do is I can come in here and, like, let's say this is going to be my eyeball. I'll call the outside one the cornea. So we'll call this cornea. And then I'm just going to duplicate it and isolate that one. And then this one's going to be iris. And then what I would just do is just find with this multi-cut tool, I'll just cut an edge loop. Let's make sure we're in flat shaded mode right there and right there, just so I know I have an edge loop that lines up perfectly with the iris and the pupil for its their default pose. And then I'll just come in here, double click on this line, shift right click, detach components, go to face mode, double click on this and delete it. And there we go. And so now it's just a matter of adjusting this. So I might do control shift, control, well, let's just scale it up. I'll just scale this up a little bit. And then again, I cover this in the next video, but then just shaping the shape of the iris. And then we'll just take this pupil, we'll set it back in space. Just pull that back. I'm making sure I'm on object mode, because if my object's rotated, my orientation might be a little bit weird. So we'll just pull that stuff backwards. And then what we could do is we'll just select this edge loop here and here, and maybe do a little bit of a bevel just to kind of keep a holding edge, and drop a holding edge in the middle there. So when I round it out, I'd still keep that shape. And then I would essentially have my iris. And I might need to push it back a little bit, but you can see it's exactly the same size and shape as that one right there. And what I can do is I might come in here, and I'll do this really quickly. I've set it up here where you can see I have my outer eyeball, and I just use that same ramp concept by just going to the attribute and then plugging a new ramp into the transparency, which is letting me see through the cornea right there. Then I just have my pupil objects. So if I take a look at that, it just looks like that. And I'm just kind of have them overlaid on top of each other. And so you can see here that this has depth. And so when you actually do the shading, you're going to have that outer cornea and it looks good. But then when you start going to the angle, you can see the irises sort of, and the pupil sort of recede into the head. Whereas when I don't have that, if that's a break connection, right? You can see if it's just on the outside, it looks like the eyes are bugging forward like that. So, that's our method of getting that kind of distinct iris recessed inside the head. And it's actually kind of how real eyeballs sort of works, is we have this clear cornea bulge in the front, and then we have this recessed disc behind the cornea with a lens in the middle of it, and that's where our iris and pupil are. Cool. So hopefully this helps. And next video, I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the modeling process.